Welcome to Canada Files. I'm Valerie Pringle. My guest today is Rick Hansen, who is a Canadian hero. After a car accident at 15 left him a paraplegic, he became one of the world's most successful wheelchair athletes. Then he decided to wheel around the world in the Man in Motion tour to raise awareness and money for spinal cord injuries and accessibility. He then founded the Rick Hansen Foundation to help create a world where everyone can go everywhere. I spoke to him in Vancouver. Hello, Rick.
Hey, Valerie.
50 years ago, you were in an accident, age 15, changed your life. But you've said, you wouldn't change a thing. And I think a lot of people would have a hard time understanding that.
Yeah, I sure did when I was 15, laying on the side of the road, with my back broken, paralyzed, legs not working, and thinking my life was over. All of my hopes and dreams shattered with my spine and my spinal cord. But 50 years later, looking back at it, going through the gauntlet of life and thinking about what's important, having to work hard, ask those questions early, being able to retool and realize, that you're still the same person. Where are your biggest handicaps? And ultimately, it's in your mind. It's all about your attitude. And then being surrounded by so many amazing people and living life to its fullest. And, you feel like the luckiest guy on the planet. And why would you change that for the use of your legs?
It's interesting you say, I'm still me. I remember wasn't that the title of Christopher Reeve's book?
Yeah.
Still me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great guy. And again, it's the same thing, whether it's Christopher Reeve or Michael J. Fox, people who have faced big challenges. The key to their salvation is not being cured. It's actually, being able to recognize they're still whole. And that's the mindset and the discipline of the journey.
You've been such an advocate for people with disabilities. Did you see things early on when you became a paraplegic? You thought, this has got to change. I've got to change this? Or was that something that developed more gradually?
It was an organic process, the first battle was the battles in my mind, the battles of, what was in the community that I faced. I had to struggle through attitudes about me, people pitying me, feeling, one of the people in my medical journey early on told me not to set my sights too high because I wouldn't be disappointed. And, and those
Wow,
things,
it's amazing how people think that's going to help, eh?
Yeah,
Ouch.
And of course, then you realize that you're surrounded by people, you meet other people with disabilities, and you start sharing similar stories. What's the hardest part of the journey? The mind, getting that under control and in sync, and then ultimately these other barriers, social or physical barriers that don't have to be there. And at some point, as you start to emerge, feeling like you're back in the groove and you're realizing that you're an athlete, that nowhere in the definition of an athlete it says you have to use your legs in order to be one. You realize, okay, I'm feeling so grateful to be engaged now, but no one gets any on their own. So what do? You try to pay it forward, and you start thinking of ways to do that, and little things, and then they become big things.
Because of the anniversary of your accident, there was a documentary done, and you went back to that spot on the road where the truck flipped over.
That fateful day.
You looked sad.
Yeah, it was a tough emotional journey. I've moving past that, in the work that I've done, and but now I've come back, to that moment, to that place, and 50 years later, sitting there right at the spot where I was dumped, and rolled over in this pickup truck, and my back was broken, and I was covered in debris, and it was brutal, and so I, for the first time in a long time, put myself back in that moment.
An image you talked about when you were immobilized at one point in your rehab and recovery in a bed that would flip you over, and you were somehow just left face down, kind of like vomiting and crying, thinking,
that was about the end of it.
Why me, what now? Like, whoa, the worst.
That was about the end of it, and I was so close to giving up the most important thing in life, right, which is hope. And something happened the next day after they gave me something for the pain and cleaned things up. I just started asking myself desperately, there's got to be something you can do, and trying to anchor on that before I went down into the abyss. And I realized, I hadn't been using my arms for a long time, and they were getting weak. And I asked somebody there, one of the healthcare professionals, could they bring me something, some rubber bands or something I can start exercising my arms. And they did, and that was it. Like bands on the side of the hospital bed, and started to work my arms. And and it was like, finally I had something to look forward to. Little baby goals builds momentum, and you start feeling, okay, what's next? Get out of that horizontal bed and get into a normal bed for your 16th birthday. Celebrate being able to look around and see your roommates for the first time, or look out the window for the first time, and then get out of that bed and into the wheelchair. And even though it was sort of a symbol of disability.
I was going to say, tell me about your thoughts about the chair.
Yeah.
Because at first, the chair didn't mean freedom to you. The chair was...
Yeah, it was a symbol of disability. I was like, I think most Canadians, and probably people around the world at that time, that era in the 70s, the wheelchair was like a symbol of disability. It was for those people that you should pity, and I had no view of that in any reality, and so I had this baggage, and so much so that I would do almost everything to avoid it until I absolutely had to. And this was a moment where if I was going to go anywhere, I guess I had to get on the chair and start figuring it out, see if it could work for me, and then
somehow it did. You became like the greatest wheelchair athlete in the world, but because of one particular guy.
Yeah, Stan Strong, wheeled into my life, guy with a spinal cord injury. I was complaining about the 4 months in the rehab center. He was 4 years in a hospital, wasn't supposed to be surviving because he was injured in the 30s when people with spinal cord injury didn't survive. And he was the head of, as a peer counselor in the spinal cord injury world. And he said, hey, I hear you used to be a basketball player. And I go, yeah, I love basketball, volleyball. He says, well, I'm the manager of this local wheelchair basketball team called the Vancouver Cable Cars, and I want you to come out and play. And it was pretty awesome. He said, I think you could be on our team. And I went, well, I guess I'll go and check it out. So I went down to Vancouver, and I didn't have much of an expectation, but when I opened the door and I saw these athletes, we're talking guys that were ripped, and they were wheeling circles around me, and they were shooting three-pointers, and I'm going whoa, this is sport. And that just kind of changed me completely. All of a sudden I got locked back in, and athletics became possible again.
And marathons, and you were really a full-on, international athlete.
I tried everything, but then eventually...
World champion.
Yeah, eventually I realized that track and marathoning were my sport, for sure. Yeah.
And one of the people you recruited for that basketball team was Terry Fox.
Yes. I was asked by Stan, it was the beginning of my pay it forward process. You give back, and he said, recruit. And so I was always looking for people, and I had dinner with someone, and they asked me if I knew this guy named Terry Fox, and I said no. He just lost his leg to cancer. He played JV basketball at Simon Fraser University, and I said, okay, well, give me his number, man. I'm going to call him up. And so he came out, and he was just in chemotherapy, weak but determined, and he became one of the best athletes on our team. We became great friends, and he inspired me for sure, and he was inspired though by our team, by Stan, and next thing you know, he's got this dream, and he's going to run across the country on one leg to help cure cancer because of his experience with cancer. And it was awesome.
Until, he got sick again.
Yeah.
And then
who would have thought?
He lost his battle with cancer. But
he did. But then, of course, his whole journey continued because his family and the community and people around the world said, hey, we can be part of his annual run and raise hundreds of millions of dollars and really make a mark. And I think that was my greatest lesson with Terry, is you know, dreams come true if you have the courage to try, and if you take the first step, you never know how far you'll go. And even though he could only go so far himself, his dream went even further. And it was an incredibly powerful lesson for me. And I'd had this dream, this idea of wheeling around the world, and I really saw how people started thinking of disability differently. Through his journey, they saw ability. And I thought, why not combine this dream of wheeling around the world with a purpose and see how far I can go?
And you thought did you think it would be easy? What did you think?
Well, having been a world champion wheelchair marathoner, I thought, yeah, it would be pretty good. But then, of course, I hadn't seen the fact that I would have a crash and dislocate my left shoulder, have another injury, and then, you know, there I was at the beginning of this world tour, having the welcome send-off, and I'm having to say a few words to this sparse crowd who believed in me. And you know, inside I look like a deer in the headlights, 'cause inside I'm thinking, God, I'm tired, I haven't slept, I've got an injury, my shoulder's killing me. I don't know, like, what have I gotten myself in? I don't even know if I can finish the day. And that's how bad it was, you know. But that first step, like the first day, the first push out, that was the greatest hurdle of all. You know, dealing with the fears, the skepticism, the self-doubt, all the logistical drives for perfection before you start, and just saying, okay, this is it, the window's here, we've got to go, and if we don't go, it'll always be woulda, shoulda, coulda.
And yet, so much of the tour sounded like real abject misery. I mean, just you were sick, you were injured, the crowds were sparse. I mean, when I read you went to Ireland and wheeled 100 miles and you got $20.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
thought, oh.
Yeah, it was. There were a lot of long, lonely, hard miles for sure, really hard. But you'd see, though, you know, the difference between dream and reality. You would see something in a day if you were looking for it. And I guess that's the key, is for all of us on the long journey when it's not happening. And if we keep in mind where we're trying to go, but if we actually realize that we're in process and it's got to show itself somewhere today, and it would be a smile or a wave or a young kid.
Or a little boy who needed a wheelchair.
Just sitting there like in tears because we were able to give him something that he desperately needed. And those are the things that drive you forward. And one more stroke, and you never know how far you'll go.
But, you know, then you hit Canada on the final leg of this Man in Motion tour. And, you know, David Foster had written a song for you, you know, St. Elmo's Fire. And, you know, it then became huge.
It was amazing how Canadians responded, and I'll be forever grateful for them welcoming me home at a time just earlier, maybe a month or so earlier, I truly thought about quitting. And my physiotherapist at the time, who became my wife, Amanda, she talked me out of that, and she said, you know, Rick, you've just got to kind of hang in there, because maybe it's not happening in the States because you haven't got the message out, but people that know about it care, and I think things will change, because I think people are better organized in Canada. And if you don't believe, you know, anymore, at least believe in me, and maybe I can, you know, remind you that hope endures and providence will set in. And so she was right.
Yeah, it was huge.
And I almost gave up. It was that close. Thank God for Amanda, and that's the other side of life, right? Sometimes when we think we're strong and independent, you know, we realize that we're all interdependent, and we all need someone to lean on. And when you're at your weakest, or sometimes your strongest, you have somebody that's there with you, for you.
You finished, you know, hugely successful, fundraising, awareness on a huge high, but then it was hard again. You and Amanda got married, which was a wonderful, happy love story. But, you know, again, to sort of have to seek for the next purpose.
Yeah.
And this is what you were meant to do. That's when Rick Hansen Foundation, Rick Hansen Institute, raising money to raise awareness, and also really try and force change about the way buildings are and barriers.
That's the key, you know, because when you get to start your new career, you know, you kind of don't have experience in the business world. You're an athlete, But my father-in-law was an incredible mentor. He reminded me, he said, look, you know, the skills you've learned living with your disability, the skills you've learned as an athlete, the skills you've learned bringing a team together to conduct and perform this Man in Motion World Tour, this is leadership. And this is the nature that you have, and you can apply that to anything that you believe in, and you just have to become comfortable in that belief and that reality, and then cut and paste and keep moving, but always follow your heart. And so what I've done is I've constantly looked for barriers or challenges, and I've looked at bringing people together to solve those, and then to be able to move the bar a little further. And that's what's got me to this place at this moment as we were chatting, and that's why I'm still in many ways all satisfied, you know, of things I've done, restless, and still growing, and still looking forward to the future, and still dreaming of new goals and dreams and new barriers to break down and new people to bring together to help. How can such an audacious, crazy dream come true of making the world accessible and inclusive for the 1.3 billion people on the planet living with a disability today?
Well, and you really, as you saw when you went around the world, but you'd see it now because this is your mission, being treated like, you know, third-class citizens or hidden away entirely.
Yeah, yeah, and people, you know, have to come at it from the same lessons that I had. You know, you had no view, you know, old attitudes, old expectations until a family member or yourself, you know, face a challenge, then you look at it differently. Next thing you know, you go, oh my gosh, you know, like, I didn't realize, first of all, there were all these barriers. I didn't realize maybe I had a bit of a pity attitude about people in this state. And then once you realize, no, I mean, this person is still whole, they still have amazing ability to love and be loved, to be able to contribute and participate in a significant way, there's just barriers in the way. And then all of a sudden people start to shift their view, and ultimately that's what it takes, you know. And so how do you do that? You get in front of people, yourself or team members or solutions, and people can then translate that into action.
Mm-hmm. And how much better have things become? I mean, in terms of maybe spinal cord research, would you, having had that accident today, be able to walk?
Well, if you think about it, back then, 50 years ago, it took over 3 days for me to get to a hospital where I could surgically, you know, be operated on to decompress the spine and to help with the healing. I mean, now it happens in hours. You know, people are medevaced out. There was no specialized spinal cord treatment center back then. It was an orthopedic hospital, and, you know, doctor would, you know, do their best, but really, you know, that wasn't their main focus. And now there's specialized centers all around the world. There was, if you talk to a researcher back then and mentioned, you know, that it could be possible to cure paralysis, they would say, I can't answer that. You know, if I even uttered that, you know, there's no way, you know, that anyone would accept me as being legitimate or credible. And then now you look, there's people who actually are having recovery, partial recovery or full recovery, and that's because research is starting to translate in how people are treated, and then there's better understandings of the spinal cord and the mystery of it.
How about changing the way the world is built, the accessibility piece? Is America better at that? You talk about they have a Disability Act.
Yeah, you know, the world has come a long way since my injury. Back then, you know, there might have been some, you know, international convention on human rights, but in reality, disability was still considered a charity. It wasn't until veterans, you know, and real amazing champions like Judith Heumann and others got together and they decided that, you know, that the United States needed to change. You know, people had given a lot, and there were so many barriers, and then they advocated for the Americans with Disabilities Act, and George Bush implemented that in the 90s, and there was an 80s expectation of what that would look like, largely wheelchair-centric, and it was a standard that was put in place, and there was a heavy federal, you know, legal approach towards that, and it powered a lot of change. And I'd say people didn't debate about, you know, it was often, you know, resolved in conflict in courts, but there was a lens and a leverage to be able to make change, and so I'd say that was a powerful way to move things forward when maybe people had been asking for other ways for decades and not much had happened. So credit to the champions and credit, to the government at the time for making that happen. The unfortunate part of that is that they pushed forward, but now that expectation, that standard back in the 80s and 90s when it was implemented is considered to be the checklist that you actually tick off when you're dealing with accessibility. And yet the world of disability has shifted. Visual, hearing, mobility, people, with cognitive or neurodiversity and mental health, there's lots of different perspectives that need to be considered, and also our expectations of people with disabilities has changed. It's no longer just getting into a building. You want to be the entertainer, or the politician, the teacher. You want to be the employee in the building and contribute. And the economy of disability has changed. With 1.3 billion people with disabilities, there's trillions of dollars globally in this market if customers are served. And so that mindset has to continue to progress if we're going to see that potential being unleashed. Otherwise, America will suffer. America will struggle with the unsustainable nature of their state. And so places like Canada can learn from that, and maybe try to not repeat it, but build off of it.
So how are you feeling about the state of things?
In Canada?
No, just generally in the world.
I'm optimistic. Yeah, I'm optimistic.
Of course you are.
Yeah, I am. I mean, I'm a little bit nervous, of course, in this era where there's so many people who are, seemingly at odds with each other, and social media and people just like loving to take shots at everything and everyone. But what I'm seeing though is also with that, the corollary to that is that with social media, with a global digital network of people coming together on common values, coming out of COVID, realizing that equality and inclusivity and the elements of being able to build a world based on your values, not maybe based on what you just were born into, is an evolving process. And so I think things are accelerating, and they're accelerating in a way that I think can really have a huge impact on people with disabilities. They're be able to access technology and liberate their potential more effectively, working from remote locations where they don't have to go through the incredible complexity of transportation and getting into a building or adapting the workplace when they've already got it. They just need to plug and play. And these are things that really, really help and create incredible opportunities. However, of course, the pace of change may also be a little faster than humans and or systems are prepared or capable of dealing with. And this is ultimately the challenge of humanity, is how capable are we of sustaining this pace. I think we really do need to be resilient and ultimately pay attention to that, because you can stretch things, but sooner or later there's always a limit.
So this is why you still feel, after all this time, that your best work is
always
still ahead of you.
I believe it, yeah. And I'm privileged, privileged to be here, passionate about my vision and my mission, and not one man in motion anymore, right? Many in motion, working together and seeing how far we can go.
But you must look back sometimes and go, what was I thinking?
I look back and I go, like, I just pinch myself, because I think I'm almost living in a dream, like compared to where I was back 50 years ago on the roadside or in the hospital or in the rehab center, thinking that everything was lost. I would have sold my soul for the use of my legs, I wanted it all back. And how would I have imagined this life? How blessed I've been. I'm so grateful.
What does being Canadian mean to you?
The great mystery. I believe Canadians don't speak enough about what it means to be Canadian. I think they're caught in lots of perspectives, everything from maple syrup to healthcare to hockey. But if you strip it all away, we're a young country. We're a big country. we've got a few people here, and we're a colonial history with an indigenous history that's even deeper, and we've got then people from around the world who have come here. All of us have hopes and dreams. We all have the same core values that we need to really, really reflect on and pull out of what this great social experiment means to us and to the world. Because if we can't do it here in Canada, where can you do it? And I think we have a great privilege being right next door to the greatest power in the world, and a huge inspiration in the United States of America, and there's a lot to learn from and to benefit from in that relationship. But we can keep moving and craft our identity and our view of the future as well.
Well, it's wonderful to see you again.
Thank you, Valerie. It's great to see you as always, and thank you for being part of this journey.
Thank you. We'll be back next week with another episode of Canada Files.
The preceding program was made possible through the generous support of Bryce and Nikki Douglas, as well as the following donors: Ted and Alice Kernahan, the Browning Watt Foundation, Mary Davey, Michael McCain and family, Earl and Janice Oborn, David and Cheryl Carr, Richard Wernham and Julia West, Tony and Sherry Fell, the Linwood Family Foundation, Steve and Catherine Coxford, Richard Pilosoff, Clinch House Foundation, the 63 Foundation, and by the Central Canadian Public Television Association,